Everyone, welcome back. Last time we were taking a look at the rise of the Renaissance and some of the Renaissance architecture and how the competition for the Florence Baptistry doors led Brunelleschi and Donatello to go down to Rome and to study ancient forms, and they're going to bring back those ideas. And it's really going to be the birth of the Renaissance, that idea of moving back or going back to Rome and studying ancient Roman ideas, sculptures, stories, and bringing those in within a contemporary setting is really going to be that idea of the Renaissance, which means the rebirth, right? The rebirth of this culture, the rebirth of light, the rebirth of excitement, of learning, of doing things differently, not just kind of living within the confines of the Catholic Church or doing things in a traditional way, but doing things kind of new and different. And I wanted to take a look at a few examples of sculpture that help to demonstrate this kind of transformation, this change to this new aesthetic. The first one, let's take a look at Donatello, and as he goes down to Rome and brings back some of these ideals with him. This one is Saint Mark's, and this one was once placed outside the Church of Orsan Michel, which translates to the Michel of Gold, the Saint Michel of Gold. It was commissioned by the cloth making guild, or the linen guild. He's standing on a pillow at the far bottom that you can see. This is to demonstrate that who paid for it, and it's also a form of advertisement of the day, of saying what they do, who did it. These are virtuous people willing to give their kind of their precious money to do something that's also religious, right? So it's a way to advertise who they are and their devotion. This is an early expression of the contrapposto stance, right? It's the contrapposto, Contrapposto, which means giving more weight to one foot than the other, which gives it more of a natural kind of feel. And here you see with St. Mark, he puts more weight on the right foot than the left foot because it's just kind of more casual. And this is an ancient Greek and Roman way of creating sculpture. It just makes it more natural, more lifelike, and he's going to bring this back. He's going to bring this style back. What we see here is the cloth falls in direct line like a column. So again, it's bringing back these ancient columns and ideas. But it gives it a sense of realism. You can see the other side turning with the knee, right? So you can see the knee bending to give that sense of realism. He resembles a Greek god, and that connects him with the eternal, right? This idea of this never ending. He holds the gospel in his hand, and so here you see a kind of a close-up of the gospel. This is the message that he received from Jesus, that he's going to give to his, disciples and the followers of his day. But it's not just for the disciples of his day, and it's not just for the disciples of Donatello's day, right? This is for everyone. This is a message that transcends time and space, right? This is for a message for everyone. What we see here is this is a person who has witnessed what he has written. He is like us. He looks like us in terms of realism, but at the same time, he's not like us, right? At the same time, he's much more kind of elevated in the sense of important because of the message that he carries, right? That he received directly from Christ, that he's now going to give to the world. And so in that sense, his legacy becomes eternal by the importance of the ideas that he shares. And so he gives them this kind of Greco-Roman god look to him while making him at the same time look realistic, right? So this is what Donatello was inspired by, these ideas of these Greek gods and how they're being represented. You can see the contrapposto stance in both of them, where more weight is being distributed to one foot rather than the other. Not necessarily structurally in terms of the actual structure of the marble, but in terms of the look for the viewer. The viewer sees this, and it seems as though more weight is on one side than the other side. Here you see Hermes on the left-hand side, who's the messenger of the gods being represented here, and on the right-hand side, this is Apollo, who is the god of light, the god of wisdom, the god of poetry and music, and so being represented and being celebrated for his gifts that he gives us, that we can then have knowledge, that we can then have the arts So he's associated with those ideas, and this is very different from the Middle Ages, right? So the Middle Ages, which comes after antiquity, the Greek and Roman values, kind of takes a look at divine and how to represent something that's not human differently. We talked a little bit about this before. We've seen images of Madonna and child before. Madonna is the mother of Jesus, and on the right-hand side we see Madonna with baby Jesus in her lap. We've seen that idea before, and she has like her left foot slightly on a pillow, slightly elevated. And then we have baby Jesus on her lap. And it looks kind of, we recognize these as figures, but at the same time, they don't really look realistic. I mean, her jawline, if you take a look at Mary's jawline, it looks just a little different, kind of blends too much into the neck. Take a look at the face and the head of Jesus. It just doesn't really seem as though the features are quite right. Mary's fingers don't really look like they have bones to them. I mean, we recognize them as fingers, but they don't necessarily have the actual form to them. And the idea for the Middle Ages was not to represent realism. They're doing something quite different, that people, when they're transfigured or when they're elevated up into heaven, they must take on a slightly different form, no longer of flesh and blood, that they take on something quite different. And here in her hand, she holds a piece of fruit, which most likely is symbolic of the fall, right? So the idea of what makes human beings human, right? What makes humanity humanity. And baby Jesus then is going to come in and grow and develop, and eventually going to remit the sins of humanity. And then on the left, you see similar ideas with this. And again, it looks kind of realistic, but not quite. The head of baby Jesus isn't quite right. But again, the idea is not to be realistic. But what we see with Donatello is that these were the images that he would have been surrounded by and influenced by. But he wants to go a different direction, right? So that's why we see that rebirth. It's a change in direction. And his St. George, he wants to create something that looks realistic. The neck and the jawline look like they actually flow together, right? With his St. George, he wants to create this idea of realism, where we see the curls in the hair, right? We see the ear kind of coming out kind of naturally, and then he has this shield that he is holding. St. George was a Christian soldier. We're gonna study a lot of Catholic saints because they are represented within art often, right? Some of them you're going to see over and over again as common motifs. But he was a Christian soldier who saved a town by killing a dragon, according to legend. Some of these stories are a little sus, but they're being represented, and so it's interesting to know that the story behind them. And after 15,000 people were converted to Christianity. And so they saw this miraculous feat, and they joined. And so he was then later elevated as a saint, and then Donatello represents him, right? The Guild of Armorers commissioned Donatello to do this, and so you can imagine why the Guild of Armorers would do this, because their main trade is developing swords and shields, and so they're going to pay for this as a way, again, to advertise what they do, right? His hand most likely held a sword inside it, and there's a hole just drilled inside the head right here, which most likely, most art historians believe that this held a helmet on top. Notice again the contrapposto stance. He is a symbol of strength and determination. Where St. Mark is a symbol of wisdom with the knowledge that he brings to the world, St. George here is an emphasis on strength. Together they teach how Christians are to be. George is the emphasis on strength, and St. Mark is the wisdom. We can see the idea of we're supposed to be strong and wise, right? So, but we can see here, much like what we can see with St. Mark, maybe a little bit even clearer here, is the emphasis on the body structure. It represents the human figure that has inward emotions as he prepares for battle. He lifts his leg and steps towards us as if he is to walk off the pedestal and enter into our space to defend Christianity, right? This is perhaps his most famous work, Donatello's most famous work. This is his David, and this is what he is representing here, right? And there came out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits of span, If he be able to fight with me and to kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then shall ye be our servants and serve us. And so this is to end the war. You give us your best fighter, we'll give you our best fighter, and the winner take all. When Saul and of all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid, because they knew there was a big guy out there. And David spake unto the men that stood by them, saying, What shall be done to the man that killeth this Philistine, and taketh away the reproach of Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of a living God? And David said to Saul, Let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with his Philistines. And the Philistine came on and drew near unto David, and the man that bare the shield went before him. And when the Philistine looked about and saw this small boy, David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, and ruddy, and fair of countenance. And the Philistine said to David, Am I a dog, that thou comest to me with staves? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, Come to me, and I will give thy flesh unto the fowls of the air and the beasts of the field. So he's kind of insulted, and he said, I'm going to insult your dead corpse. Then said David to the Philistine, Thou comest to me with a sword and with a spear and a shield. But I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, God of armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. This day will the Lord deliver thee into my hand, and I will smite thee. And it came to pass that when the Philistine arose and came and drew nigh to meet David, that David hasted and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag and took thence a stone and slang it and smote the Philistine in his forehead, that the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon the face of the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling, with a stone, and smote the Philistine and slew him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood upon the Philistine, and took his sword, and drew out the sheath thereof, and slew him, and cut off his hand therewith. And the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, and they fled, right? And so this is the moment that he represents, the moment of victory. David already stands over the head of Goliath, which is at his feet, the sword of Goliath in his hand, and he is victorious. We see the lack of clothing here represents the lack of armor, the lack of ability to defend himself, and yet he steps on the battlefield with faith in God and is victorious. And so this is a celebration of courage and honor that Christians should have as they face the Goliaths, the challenges, the adversity in their lives. And it's very different from the Middle Ages, which is representing something quite different. We see Donatello is inspired by the ancient style and represents here kind of more of a Greek god, completely unclothed, to represent the bone structure, to celebrate the creation, to celebrate the form of humanity, right? Kind of coming together. This is me standing next to it just to give you the sense of scale. It's about life size. And this was pretty radical in its day, for it was the first life-size nude coming forth. And so people were like, what are you doing? They weren't really sure about this, but it becomes the standard. It quickly becomes accepted, and it becomes the standard. And here you can see a little bit more clearly the stone inside his hand, the one that he used to kill Goliath. This one is an earlier version before he goes to Rome. So it demonstrates how Rome changed his style. We can see here, the neck is a little bit too thick. Again, there's that kind of weird interaction between the neck and the jawline. The fingers are too elongated and look a little bit too rubbery. He still has the contrapposto stance, and so that's something that he was already interested in. And we see the head of Goliath at his feet with the sling, and you can see the stone kind of inside the forehead of Goliath as it sinks in, as the story indicates. But I like to kind of think about these two in connection, right? What's interesting about these is these two are both in the Bargello Museum in Rome, and so you can see the transformation. You can see Donatello's style change as he goes to Rome and is inspired by Romans, right? But notice the difference, the focus on the body, the form, and trying to get that right. But I love this is me just going to be walking around it in the Bargello, just to give you a sense of the three-dimensional scale. You can see the helmet, and it kind of goes, the feather goes up and kind of caresses the leg, the right leg of Donatello. And I love just the look that Donatello represents with his long hair, his hat on, right? Not really a helmet. This is a hat, not really for protection, right? It's more for protection from the sun. And he kind of is lost in thought. The battle is won, and he's already retreated into his childlike innocence, right? This is a representation of childlike innocence. And this kind of pre-puberty boy that doesn't have the muscle build, right? The kind of the structure that you would think of a man having. This is someone that completely stepped on the battlefield and was vulnerable, and yet he went out victorious because he had faith in God, right? So this is, again, just a couple other close-ups and detail, and this becomes quite the standard, right? Just a couple more images of Donatello. This one is the Feast of Herod, and this is representing when Herod gets the head of John the Baptist for Salome when she dances in front of him. This comes from the scripture in the New Testament, and here's what it says: For Herod had laid hold of John and bound him and put him in prison for Herodias' sake, his brother Philip's wife. For John said unto him, It is not lawful for thee to have her. And when he would, right, so John spake against them, getting together with a relationship. It said, this is not moral. And so that angered her, and then she wants to make sure that he is killed for it. And he would have him put to death, and he feared the multitude because they counted him as a prophet. So he didn't really want to kill John the Baptist. He was a little afraid of what the people would do. But when Herod's birthday was kept, the daughter of Herodias danced before him, this is Salome, and pleased Herod, whereupon he promised with an oath to give her whatsoever she would ask. And she, being before instructed of her mother, said, Give me here John the Baptist's head in a charger. And the king was sorry, nevertheless, for the oath's sake. And them which sat with him at meat, he commanded it and gave it to her. And he sent and beheaded John in the prison. And his head was brought in the charger and given to the damsel, and she brought it to her mother. And so this is a representation of that particular scene in multiple moments within the scene. In the very center ground, you can see the musician playing for Salome as she dances before Herod. And then this is the presentation of Herod. This is the John the Baptist's head on the charger, and the servant kneeling before Herod. And you have these people that, and their real emotional kind of responses to it, where you have this little kid here saying, "Ooh, get away!" They're kind of freaked out. This other person kind of leaning in and like, "What is this? Why would you bring this to dinner?" Another one kind of aghast here. And this one, people believe, is perhaps Salome, kind of with the twist of kind of contorted nature of her body, kind of making it look as though it's a dance, and these other people are onlookers. And then this is the head being presented to Herodias, and to say this is what's happened. And so what we see here is, again, focusing on realism, but also focusing on space. Notice that the idea of the columns and the rounded arches give that kind of harken back into this ancient story. And so we see the blending of ancient forms with Christian themes, and that's going to be a major idea, a major concept of the Renaissance. Here we see, this is one of the most perplexing images of the Renaissance. It's Donatello's Mary Magdalene done later in life. Usually art historians like to fit works neatly in a box. They examine common styles that they can analyze and can compare. The Renaissance images generally are balanced and harmonious. They demonstrate ideals of beauty and simplicity. However, this work is not harmonious or beautiful, right? At least, in terms of prettiness. Usually, Mary Magdalene is known for her beauty, but here she is emaciated, reminiscent of a hermit, right? She was a close follower of Jesus. She had been associated with sin, specifically prostitution. She was often represented at the feet of Christ, at the scene of the crucifixion and lamentation. We'll see many images of Mary Magdalene. By the 15th century, there have been many stories upon stories that have been told about her to add to what little that we know about her from the New Testament. So these kind of myths and legends start to emerge. One story states that after Christ's death, she spent 30 years in the wilderness repenting. I don't know, if repentance takes that long. But the story is that she was so devout, right? She was so focused on Christ. She lives the life of what is known as an ascetic, someone that lives apart from the world and just focused on communicating with God. So going off in the wilderness and just communicating with God and forgetting the world, right? Because the world represents generally corruption. She is thin and frail here. The spiritual is everything. She's completely forsaken the physical. Her hands come together in prayer, but they don't touch. Her hair comes across her face. Often she is represented as young and beautiful, but here she is old and not beautiful. And so Donatello tells this, or turns the story on its head. Notice the juxtaposition between the frailty of her body and the strength of her devotion, right? Again, what we see is art is teaching people how to be better Christians, right? How to be more devout, right? She represents the ideals of devotion towards religion. She is the ideal representation of someone who gives life to God and who desires to connect. And so what we see here is kind of towards the high point of Donatello's career with Donatello's David and towards the end of his career with Mary Magdalene. They look different. There's some stylistic similarities with the contrapposto stance, but stylistically they also look a little bit different in terms of representing ideals of beauty. But both of them together represent something about devotion, about faith, about conviction, right? So these are kind of the messages that Donatello is representing. He takes these classical forms and he comes back and he uses them to further the idea of Christianity and Christian devotion.